Just a second.
Yes, okay.
Yes, Sound? Sound?
Yes.
So good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to another round of conversation. I'm your host today, Dr. Saurabh Banerjee, Associate Professor of English Literature of an affiliated college under the University of Calcutta. And today we have with us from Athens, Greece, Evangelia Vasilapou, who is a linguist and an international speaker and expert English for academic purpose, EAP, English for specific purpose, ESP, English as a foreign language, EFL, trainer, and also the Distinguished Educator 2020 award. A very warm welcome to you, and thank you for accepting my invitation to participate in this conversation.
My pleasure for being with you today.
Thank you once again. So we begin.
Of course.
Please. As a language teacher and an academic advisor for over 2 decades, you have presented papers, chaired sessions, and delivered keynote addresses at innumerable international conferences, some of them on COVID-19. Our endeavor in this post-conference interview today will be to explore how we can add an interactive dimension to pedagogy and educational objectives without losing focus on the key issue of delving deep into the pandemic shock to education and discern its remedies. So from this perspective, my first question to you is that in addition to the socio-economic and financial crisis, we are also facing a major educational crisis in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. And in your keynote lecture at the international conference titled Institutional Interventions and Strategic Intelligence for Tomorrow's Education After COVID-19 in Indonesia, you had addressed that crisis and quoted the World Bank Global Director for Education, Jamie Saavedra, saying that, quote, we are already living a learning crisis before the pandemic. We were already living a learning crisis before the pandemic. With the coronavirus, the learning crisis will be even deeper, unquote. So would you please tell us what was the crisis before the coronavirus?
Of course. First of all, let me refer to the source I'm going to use, the World Bank 2020, and the title was The COVID-19 Pandemic, Shocks to Education and Policy Responses. So as you said, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was living a learning crisis. Before the pandemic, 258 million children and youth of primary and secondary school age were out of school. The learning poverty rate in low and middle income countries was 53%. Even worse, the crisis was not equally distributed, as the most disadvantaged children and youth had the worst access to schooling, highest dropout rates, and the largest learning deficits. So the COVID-19 pandemic now threatens to make education outcomes even worse. The pandemic has already had profound impacts on education by closing school almost globally, everywhere in the planet. It was a shock, as I said, to all education systems. But it is possible to counter those shocks and to turn crisis into an opportunity. The first steps are to prevent students' learning loss, using remote learning, prevent dropouts, ensure healthy school conditions, and use new techniques to promote the rapid learning recovery. As the school system stabilizes, countries can use the focus of the recovery period not to replicate the features of the pre-COVID systems and pre-COVID situation, but to build improved systems and accelerate learning for all the students. That was the case with the pre-COVID situation.
Yeah, that was the case with the pre-COVID situation. And you also said that it has aggravated it, or rather, Jamie Saavedra said that it has aggravated it. So would you please tell us how the pandemic has aggravated it?
Good. New evidence now shows that the shutdowns caused by COVID-19 could exacerbate the existing achievement gaps. education system was not built to deal with extended shutdowns. Nobody was prepared for that, like those that were imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So teachers, administrators, and parents as well have worked really hard to keep learning alive. Low-income students continue to be underrepresented people. However, if they get quality education, they can break from the cycle of poverty. Knowledge is power, and this is undeniable. I mean, education, therefore, helps to reduce inequalities and to reach gender equality. There are actually multiple barriers to education, and now COVID-19 exposes significant gaps in our education systems. So my answer to that would be rather long, because it has impacted, COVID-19 has impacted education in many aspects. So,
never mind, we'd love to hear a long answer from you, definitely. Please
okay, so thank you. So the first thing is extreme poverty. Extreme poverty means that the child needs to get a job instead of going to school. So according to UNICEF, the sub-Saharan Africa has the widest gender gaps in youth literacy. Let me use an example and become more specific. In Central African Republic and Chad, only 61 girls and 62 girls are enrolled in secondary school for every 100 boys in each country, respectively. So according to UNESCO, nearly 2/3 of the world's illiterate adults are women. And there are still 773 million illiterate adults around the world, most of whom are female. Another barrier, apart from poverty, is the lack of basic needs for online learning, like, access to the internet and technology tools, to life-sustaining needs like access to nutrition, nutritious food. As many students face food insecurity and rely on school meals or a safe living environment. Yes, these are parameters that we need to take into account. So additionally, school systems were ill-prepared for such a global educational crisis. For example, the Richmond Public Schools, Virginia's second poorest school in the district, is using a combination of reallocated funds and philanthropic support to buy an additional 10,000 computers for students who need them. South Carolina has converted thousands of school buses into mobile hotspots, a very important term to remember, the hotspots, yes, to connect the rural students to the internet. And state leaders are helping families sign up for free service offered in response to the crisis. Apart from that, you see the situation in colleges and universities, right? What about your university?
Yeah, of course. They're facing the same crisis. Yes, please continue.
Globally, so the university campuses across the country also poses a serious problem for post-secondary students. Education in emergencies cannot be forgotten, and these have an equally detrimental impact if they are left unaddressed. So education cannot wait, cannot be put on hold. It is not something that it can be stabilized. We talk about learning, continuous learning. So this pile-on effect of the coronavirus is that during the global COVID-19 pandemic, interruptions to education can have long-term implications, especially for the most vulnerable. There is a real risk of regression, a return to a former or less developed state. The children whose basic foundational learning, I'm talking about reading and maths and languages, etc., was minimal before. So millions are also more exposed to psychosocial and physical risks during COVID-19. We should prioritize, therefore, 4 target groups: girls and females, refugees and migrant children, children with disabilities, for classes on Zoom and other video lessons. Conferencing platforms may be the current trend. Most people can have access to it, but thousands of disabled students, and I wouldn't say disabled, that's my politically correctness, I would say students with disabilities, to correct myself, are finding hard to access classes because there is no laptop, there is no internet, there is no format suitable for them, and there is absence of sign language interpreters and transcripts designed specifically for them. So although online classes is a religion to us, is something that we follow and something very powerful, it is not accessible to all the students, to those having visual, hearing, and learning disabilities.
Right.
What do you think about that so far? Let me pause for a while.
You are absolutely right. These are genuine problems. These are real life problems. And when we say students, we assume that students have all the abilities, but then we have to understand that there are students who are differently able. So it's a good point that you have made.
Good. Let's talk about now another barrier, another thing that has worsened, has to do with the trauma and the mental health issues. A further issue is that out-of-school children are more likely to be exposed to risks like family violence, or child labor, or forced marriages, or trafficking and exploitation, because school is supposed to be a safe learning environment. And with all the school closures, children lose this kind of safety. For the majority of vulnerable children, education is life-saving. This is what we should bear in mind. And not only does it provide safety and protection, but most importantly, it instills hope for a brighter future. COVID-19 has made our broken school system worse, as we said before. Continuing education through alternative learning pathways as soon as possible must be a top priority right now to ensure limited interruption to education and consider cases with students whose faces teachers have never seen online before because they can't access it.
Yes.
I would also like to focus on the chronic underfunding now, the financial sector, the misguided curricular policies, because there is a curricular design as well that was not prepared, was not specifically designed for a pandemic. The policies that prioritize testing over real learning, and social policies that favored austerity over taking care of the most vulnerable members of our society. So it is not just testing or learning, it is also taking care of the needs of other students as well, to address all target groups of students, all the student population. This is success. Where lies success? A successful educator is an educator that can be like a chameleon and a person that can change and fit to all situations and give his or her soul. So education, specifically for girls, is very important. And after this period of pandemic, statistics, I'm sure about that, will show an increased number in school dropouts by adolescent girls due to all this situation, these parameters we talked about before. So to conclude, the pandemic is just one more crisis on top of already existing crisis, and that is of gender equality. So from bad, we are going to worse. And COVID-19 exacerbates the problem of educational inequality. And I would like to close this question with a specific example of Nigeria. May I?
Yeah, of course. Please carry on. Of course.
As stated by the World Poverty Clock, the nation currently has about 50% of population living in poverty, with many of the citizens struggling to afford 3 square meals. This means that there are a lot of students who do not have access to either radio or television, coupled with the issue of erratic power supply. It's not standardized. There are gaps. So such students also have no internet access, nor educational technological resources, a situation that is creating a gap in the academic process for as long as the pandemic persists. So this learning crisis is widening the social gaps instead of narrowing them. A Nigerian nationalist and statesman stated that the children of the poor you failed to train will never let your children have peace.
Absolutely true. And that was a very all-encompassing answer.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So what I'd like to know next is the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly affected our social lives and customs. And as a teacher of English literature, I have no doubts whatsoever that the effects of this pandemic and the problems it has caused will be reflected in the literature that will be produced henceforth. But what is discernible right at the moment is that it has drastically changed the language that we are speaking. And as a linguist, you are the best person to talk about this. And in one of your lectures that I've heard titled, "Do You Speak the Language of COVID-19?" you have quoted bloggers saying, quote, "Great social change brings great linguistic change," unquote. And have further gone on to say that COVID-19 is a force majeure event and a dynamic reminder that there is a connection between this pandemic and language change. I have two questions for you following this. Would you elaborate what you had meant? And is this change visible in a more pronounced manner in any particular field of language? I mean, literature, casual conversation, social media usage, etc., etc.
Okay. First of all, let's clarify the term force majeure. It is a French term, and it literally means a greater force. It is an event for which no party can be held responsible. It's unavoidable. It has to do with events that are like natural disasters, climatic or seismic events, warfare, and pandemics. So COVID-19 is the force majeure here that brings the linguistic change at an unprecedented and unparalleled speed. So due to this dizzying pace at which the virus has spread, its dominance in the media and the global interconnectivity, we have created a new language for coronavirus. This linguistic change is indeed visible in casual parlance and discourse metaphors that are woven intricately into the tapestry of language. We use them so much in everyday language. Many use corona as a prefix. For example, yes, I don't know if you have heard the term corona babies.
Yes, definitely.
It's not difficult to understand that we talk about the children born or conceived during the pandemic. So the term COVID-19 was coined in February 2020 when the World Health Organization announced the official name of the virus, but its use has skyrocketed ever since. And we experience the usage of all terms in a new light. It's what I call the nuancing of already existing words, or reframing, if you prefer that term. The war metaphors and war language as well, invoking battles and front lines. If you see the newspaper headlines, yes, and the health workers that have been called heroes. So we see this widely applied to everyday discourse. We also see many neologisms, a novel language, a wealth of linguistic
newly created words, yes.
A wealth of linguistic creativity that can be used as a coping mechanism, because people try to understand the world around them and they try to alchemize fear and make it action. Because by creating a language about something you don't understand, then you conceptualize it better. It gives people also a shared vocabulary. Now, we can communicate about the same crisis. If there are no words, we cannot express ourselves at the same time. So we use a verbal wit technique, and I'm going to use an article title I read recently. It read, "How the Coronavirus Has Infected Our Vocabulary." What do you think about this? I found it very, very witty.
Yeah, this is very, interesting. The word infection being used in a different sense.
I didn't expect it to happen, that the virus infects our vocabulary. So
infected and infested.
Infected, yes. Also, we can see it in a humoristic way. For example, neologism and corona coinages such as covidiot and covidient, which means covidiot is a combination of coronavirus and idiot, which means someone who ignores the warnings, doesn't take any hygiene measures, doesn't follow any safety rules. And covidient is the opposite, is a combination of coronavirus and obedient, or covexit, that has to do with the exit from the COVID-19 crisis. So far, so good. It's not difficult linguistics.
No. It's absolutely easy to grasp.
Okay. Now, about the social media, we see the term self-isolation. It is used to, abbreviations and acronyms as well, like WFH, working from home, or we see PPE, that stands for personal protective equipment, and word chunks, collocations, such as social distancing, words that go together, community spread, droplet transmission, flattening the curve, emerging disease, solitary confinement, and so many others. Also the term infodemic, that is a portmanteau word. It's a linguistic blend of two words, information and epidemic. It is used widely in the media. Now for literature, and I think that's your field now, and I expect you to comment on that. There have been many COVID-19 poetry competitions. What have you noticed around the world?
Yeah, I have noticed, but in India, the situation is such that we'd rather not comment on that now, because the situation is very grim. We have not yet peaked.
I see.
So I, as I told you a little earlier, that I'm sure that in India this trend will catch up, but only in the later few months after we have contained the virus a bit.
Okay, but I have read about this in many articles, that there have been so many entries that are inspired by COVID-19, and it's a fact that we should not ignore. So this surge of interest in pandemic poetry and coronavirus poems is not surprising. It is the lockdown literature, if I am allowed to use the term, a lockdown literature. And written verse has always expressed people's hopes and fears, and their desire to understand, as I said before, the challenges of life, and to connect with something that is immutable, something that is unyielding and inflexible, like the virus, because we're still struggling with it. Nothing has ended yet.
Yes.
And Robert Frost, this is a present from me to you, wrote that poetry provides a momentary stay against the confusion of the world.
Yes, Robert Frost, what a great poet. I'll try to come back to him in a moment after I finish asking you on the questions that I have in mind. Okay, so taking this conversation a little deeper, in the same lecture that I spoke about in the question that I asked you just before this, you have also referred to a revision of the Oxford English Dictionary to record the impact of COVID-19 and how the founder of the EnglishClub.com has created a COVID-19 related page and called it Language in the Making. So as an expert English language trainer, how do you think this new vocabulary or language can be used to teach language skills to students?
Okay. Apart from the theoretical field, there is always the practical field. And now I'm going to move to a more practical perspective. This new language, of course, can be used in class discussions, and educators all over the world need to understand that we should move on to a new normal curriculum design. An ideal curriculum design has to incorporate many parameters and has to not stay stagnated. We need to develop it and modernize it in order to incorporate all the changes that are happening around us. That's the successful curriculum. So given this, having this in mind, I would say that the new language can be used in class discussions about coronavirus in English. Perfect. Whole class discussions, online discussions. It depends on how the pandemic is going to develop. Or we can use quizzes, COVID-19 worksheets, or even have a lesson on the latest facts and advice on the virus. For example, they can be given the latest World Health Organization information on COVID-19, small, manageable texts. They don't have to be long. And the texts that refer to the definition, they refer to the spread of the virus, the symptoms, the possible treatments. They can do debates. They can actually present collaboratively by sharing their screen. It's not so. I don't think that would be so difficult for them to make an informative presentation, or even be given newspaper articles, which is because COVID-19 is the #1 topic globally. And they can also, something that I was thinking about lately, is they can conduct a survey through the social media or messaging, to ask close friends and relatives about their routine, how it has changed since the outbreak of COVID-19. They can also talk about which changes have been positive and which have been negative, how they feel. They can write poems, they can share, they can use the language in the language. That's the language in the making. They can also blog posts, they can also watch YouTube videos, and on top of that, they can research the topic. They can become language analysts. These are my main suggestions.
Yes.
Yes.
It would be a very practical solution and relatable too for the students. Okay, so moving on, my belief is that even if the COVID-19 threat is neutralized, these new words are here to stay for a long time in our consciousness. So what do you think are some of the pedagogical implications of using this new COVID-19 vocabulary or language? Could you please elaborate with a few examples?
Yes, okay. So I will try to narrow down now, and I would number as well so that they can be more memorable. So #1 implication for me, pedagogical implication, is that this outpouring of metaphors and neologisms and lexical innovations we have seen in the past few months points to the fact that the linguistic creativity is a key part of language, to view language as a living organism. So we need to modernize the speaking curriculum, the writing curriculum with the new topic. Life goes on, decades move on. We can't stand still. Point #2 is that this new vocabulary helps people articulate their worries about the biggest health crisis we have seen in generations, the last decades. It brings people together around a set of collective cultural reference points. It's a kind of lexical social glue.
Yes.
Number three, it brings authenticity to the classroom. Students are engaged in real-world problems, scenarios, and challenges, because if they are not challenged, they cannot be engaged. They switch it off. So the students start becoming social change agents. They contribute to this social change by becoming part of it. So education shouldn't stop only at engagement levels. It should be about engagement in our world, the so-called global citizenship, membership in a broader class, the class of humanity. Look at around us, what is happening.
Yes, yes. Okay.
These were the main pedagogical implications.
And I'd like to say that we can be very sure that life will not go back to what it was in the near future, even if the coronavirus pandemic is contained. So what, according to you, would be the strategies of some of the global organizations like the UNESCO to address the new normal in tomorrow's education after COVID-19?
Good question. There are many. Yes, there are many strategies. There are many strategies that can be put forward. I particularly believe in united strategies. So I want to, because there are so many, and there is a plethora, and I think for time restrictions, I can't refer to all of them. That would be a whole presentation in itself.
Yes,
I particularly want to focus on UNESCO to address your question, because and just make clear that most global organizations' major ideology and mentality is that it is a crisis what we are facing right now, but it is also an opportunity. In every crisis, there is an opportunity, and we are given the chance as educators, as awakeners, as academicians, as scholars, as researchers, as everything that might entail, to bring change and lay the foundations from the beginning and make them even stronger than before. So for UNESCO education, which is the most effective, for them, the most effective investment is to achieve equitable, and not only equitable, but also sustainable development, not just to last for a few months or for just a year. This has to have a long-term development, sustainable, and it must become a priority. It should not only be seen as an effort to promote the right for education to all. Yes, that's good, and I sympathize with it, and I'm in favor of it. But what is critical is to achieve the education for all, to continue this effort to be at the core of the post-pandemic agenda. So some solutions, some strategies is that we should understand that there is no assumption that everybody can just move online like this. All eyes are turned to digital technologies. I use digital technologies and I like them, and I think that they can be very, very, very effective. If we know how to use technology, then we talk about technological education technology, and it has nothing to be afraid if it is compared to physical classroom education, okay? But it has to be used wisely. So in order to provide learning continuity, the existing digital gender divide was made clear, and we risk to marginalize the girls, as I said before. We know from data and experience that millions of girls around the world are not online and therefore may not have access to the learning which is taking place in the digital space. There is a sense of what I call female absenteeism. So how do we expect, now you tell me, how do we expect the girls who are trying to survive to afford expensive data to get online? And this was a point, actually, I'm using the question of Mary Jacob from Activista Nigeria. The world has gone digital and those girls are being excluded. Even if a home is connected, the girls can't even use the internet, she says. Why? Because they are busy doing chores and while their brothers are using the internet. And finishing this question, to respond to these challenges, youth-led networks are working around issues of connectivity. They have taken to low-tech approaches, more accessible to them, such as community radio learning programs, to reach girls everywhere. Youth activists, another term to highlight, youth activists are also supporting those girls who are online through digital literacy to help them navigate. We are, as the world progressively reopens the schools, we may need to pause and listen what are they planning to, how we can have all these people come back to the schools with the reopening if possible and when this is possible, and to listen to this underrepresented student population and hear about their needs and feel about their traumas and experiences. So we have to ensure that all their needs are being addressed. And young activists highlighted measures such as scholarships, grants, provision of stationery, and many other incentives that can promote girls' education. And don't forget that most families have lost their means of livelihood during the pandemic. So scholarships can encourage people to get back to school on condition that the schools reopen.
Okay, so my next query would be that in your keynote address in Indonesia, you have mentioned that this recovery will involve four major parameters: academic, physical, fiscal, and psychological or emotional. Yes. What do you suggest in order to achieve this recovery plan? And could you please define what each parameter involves?
Yes. It's not only talking about strategies, and it's not only talking about prioritizing all these needs, but it is also talking about how we are going to apply all these things. So they have proposed the four parameters, as you said. I'm going to focus briefly on each of these. For the academic recovery, we need to focus on alternative education formats to fill the gap in an emergency situation. One important reason for considering alternative schools, the non-traditional schools, how I call them the progressive schools, is that it can take considerable time for students to make up lost time in classrooms, as well as adjust emotionally and economically afterwards, because there are more parameters, not only the learning parameter, because if they are blocked emotionally, they cannot learn mentally. So to illustrate an innovation alternative learning scenario for the cohort is the group of the post-coronial learners, is the HiFlex model, as I have mentioned in my presentations. It falls under the category of blended synchronous learning. It is a flexible course design, which makes both online and in-person experiences equal. It breaks down the boundary between fully online and fully physical classrooms. So it is simultaneous teaching. Other alternative learning mechanism option is the self-learning, based on a self-learning guideline in electronic or printed versions, making audio and visual learning contents accessible through websites, broadcasting recorded lessons through TV or radio, and distance learning and small group learning as well. That was for the academic part. For the physical recovery, it includes realization of the high-touch areas for infection spread and awareness of the personal hygiene, management infection policies and control, awareness of symptoms, and prevention strategies for students. It is also valuable for schools to provide medical staff, if possible, and these people would be held responsible for sharing information about students, any questions that might come up on the spot, and give them in real time, because there is a difference between giving a leaflet and informing and actually interacting in real-time pieces of advice. The fiscal now recovery entails documentation of the expenses that are associated. Schools need to determine the disaster funding, and they should ask for reimbursement. In particular, what I call the emergency relief funding is necessary to be requested, because here we talk about requests. It is not so easy for the government to help in all these areas so quickly and so following impeccable rules. They need to be prepared as well. Everybody needs to be prepared. Now, for the psychological part or the emotional recovery, we should focus on identifying students who need crisis counseling. And they show signs that they are struggling with the adjustments and the trauma, because not all people are the same. Mental health needs after a disaster should be addressed as part of a recovery. It is not only learning. It is our psyche as well, both for educators and for students. because we talk about systemic reform. Parents, students, and teachers. It's the triangle. So staff members need to be employed and hired for trauma and grief, as I call them, informed programs, such as the psychological first aid for schools, PFAS, if you have heard of them. They should be involved as well. These were the four parameters.
Yes. And I have seen that you have made a very interesting reference to the businessman and a futurist, Alvin Toffler,
yes, the
who had said that, quote, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn, unquote. I feel that this basically points to adapting, reskilling, and upskilling. How do you think these may be achieved?
Well, that's an even harder question. And that will be a short answer this time.
Okay.
Because I think many educators have used these terms as well, of learning, unlearning, and relearning. And I'm glad they do it, because it's the essence. In just 3 words, we understand how we should be. So if I rephrased the statement, I would say that learning, unlearning, and relearning are equal. They all mean literacy. What is unlearning and relearning? Unlearning is an ever-changing, it is a fluid process of exploration by using different sets of questions about everything we know. And we value to discover the unknowns. So relearning can be more accurately described as refocused learning. What is upskilling and reskilling now? Upskilling can be defined as helping the students or the graduates to get a qualification at a higher level, the one in comparison to the one they already hold, I mean. Reskilling can be defined as the achievement of a second or a subsequent level, and progression can be downward, referring to equivalent qualification that never they ask for upskilling. So it is a much more stable situation, but not losing the things that educators already know and students already know, to lay the foundations and stabilize them in that sense. These will be the 2 realities for the post-COVID-19 education. And there are strategies to bridge the students' skill gap in the post-pandemic age. These are as follows. Collaboration can be made with education providers for skills-based development programs. After school programs and camps can offer youth opportunities to learn new skills. For example, robotics or programming. So job readiness, bootcamp programs, job training combined with mentorship as well, classroom and online instruction, offer practical and theoretical training. Construction of new revolutionary campuses, digitally enhanced classrooms, seminar halls and laboratories, as well as in-house studio recordings of video presentations or lectures for the campuses and universities to be made available. We should also adapt the curricula to deliver a wide variety of courses, new skills, data science, artificial intelligence, computing. This, of course, in an ideal environment, because we cannot become unprepared. We cannot be unprepared in a second wave of a coronavirus pandemic. It is ideal, but we have to start from somewhere. It is better to have the framework in mind and start making slow movements to an ideal environment than staying stabilized and doing nothing.
Yeah, very well expressed. Very well expressed indeed.
Now, I need to drink a little bit of water, and I'm going to take this as a small break to ask you.
Oh, role
Some things,
reversal.
yes,
Okay, no
yes,
problem. No
yes.
problem.
We are going to reverse
No
it
problem.
because
Okay.
I live in Greece. I try to be informed about everything that goes on globally, but I don't live in India. And I think
Yes.
that today, many people from India may be listening to us, and I respect this audience, and I want to give them some live concerns be analyzed by both sides, me and you, because
Yeah.
you are also an expert. You are also an expert in your field, and you study a lot. We had excellent discussions in the past. I know the way you think, and I want you to share your views. So, to
Fair
recapitulate,
enough. Fair enough.
I have read in an article, COVID Challenges to Indian Education System, that was written by, and correct me with the pronunciation, Pankaj Kumar Samandare.
Yeah, Pankaj Kumar Samantari. Yes, that would be the
Good.
pronunciation. Correct.
All right.
Yes.
Of ELET's news network, some interesting data, and refer to three areas. I want to ask you about the online tutorials in India, the digital divide in India, and the
Okay.
paradigm shift in education. I would like to share these with you, and I invite you to express your views. And my question is this: do you think, I'm going to use some extracts, and my question is,
Yes.
do you think that these extracts I'm going to read reflect the original picture of the real world in India? Or do you think it is just another journalistic distortion of the truth? So I start reading my first extract. Let me have a look at my notes. Okay. It says, in India, online tutorials, including Coursera and many more, are gaining immense popularity during the crisis. In India, state governments are the largest providers of education. However, they are plagued by several challenges, including large student-teacher ratios, infrastructure, and lack of quality training amongst teachers. Private schools, too, face a problem with teacher training. The floor is all yours.
Okay. A very difficult question, and I'll try to do justice to it. So, to answer this, I'll have to go back a little in time. You see,
Okay.
the Right to Education Act, which came into force in India on the 1st of April 2010, so it's a long way back, ensured that education became a fundamental right of every child. It had recommended that the optimal teacher-student ratio be 1:30. So that's a big number. So definitely there is the existence of this large teacher-student ratio that you had raised, or that you had quoted that person raising. Again, infrastructure-wise, the central government of India and the different state governments are working very hard on this. And a lot of improvement has happened in the recent past, and I believe it is continuing even now. Why I believe it's happening even now. Now, if we come to the question of the lack of quality training amongst teachers, I completely disagree with them. Why? I'll tell you. A teacher's eligibility test, that is TET, is mandatory for becoming a government school teacher, and a B.Ed degree or a JBT, B.Ed is a Bachelor in Education or a Junior Basic Training, JBT, has become compulsory eligibility for a teacher in both private and government schools in India. But yes, if we are talking about quality training for conducting digital classes, I agree that the teachers were not ready or trained for that. Since the chalk and talk method of classroom teaching was the primary mode of teaching in India, and even accessing digital resources as secondary reading materials was only done at the college and university levels. So, yes, neither the teachers nor the students were prepared for this shift to an exclusive digital mode of teaching. That would be my answer.
Okay, I see. So epitomizing, we need to develop our, let's say, competencies about preparedness. So if I synthesize
Yeah.
preparedness competencies, this is what you're trying
Yes.
to
Yes.
convey. All right, I move on to the second
Absolutely.
extract now.
Okay. Yes.
I continue. It says, there is a
Yeah.
huge digital divide in urban and rural schools. In a recent survey, over 75% of students are impacted due to the lockdown, as they found hard to study online. Over 80% of students said they need hand holding to shift from offline to online, and over 25% said they need proper training to pursue education through online. What about this one? These are
Yes.
very
Yes.
serious numbers, serious percentages.
Yes. Yeah, I would have to agree that there is a great digital divide in India at the moment. It is true that there is the problem of poor or inadequate internet connectivity in the rural and suburban areas. And in addition to that, is the fact that most of the students in the rural belts cannot simply afford the gadgets, a personal computer, a laptop, maybe tablet, or even an Android or an iPhone, and the internet connectivity required for attending online classes. But even in the urban areas, if the internet connectivity is available and strong, there are many students from the economically weaker backgrounds, especially in the government schools, who are finding it difficult to attend online classes. And again, if they have a phone with internet connectivity, more often than not, it is the one phone for the whole family. And as you had just raised the issue a little earlier, the question of who gets to use it and when becomes important. So, in case of a family having more than one child, that is, many children, it is
I need to
usually
say,
the eldest male child who gets to use it for his classes. The younger male siblings come next, and the daughters last. Also, I'd say that since it is school from home, the other problem for the girl child is that she is expected to perform household chores at the cost of attending classes. Now, if I can quote from UNESCO, the school closure in India has affected something like 320 million children. I repeat, 320 million children. That's a huge number. Enrolled from
indeed,
pre-primary to tertiary levels of education. Yes. It has also
indeed.
been estimated that of these, about 158 million are female students. So you get the picture. Then again, there is the question of these differently able children who went to special schools before this pandemic. Now, most of them would need hand holding even to switch on their devices and logging into their classes, assuming that they have the devices. So, a great majority of them are being forced to opt out of school. And generally speaking, uh, using OTT platforms like, say, Zoom, Google Meet,
Indeed.
Sysophonics, and the likes, all of a sudden, without prior and proper training, is definitely putting a lot of pressure on most of these students, and their anxiety levels are also increasing. I agree, all these combined are definitely negatively affecting the education in India at the moment. That's all.
So if we synthesize, all this create a panic situation, right?
Yes, yes,
A panic
yes,
situation. Unprepared. So I go back again to develop the preparedness competencies.
mm,
It's
mm,
important. And now that we know what we have gone through, it would be unwise not to develop better in order to,
yes, absolutely,
in
absolutely.
order to recover from this and have a faster exit. And my last extract. There is a paradigm shift witnessed in the education sector in India for the last 2 months. Schools and teachers have been forced to adapt to e-learning, leaving the traditional way of teaching. The adoption of technology was reluctant, I think you mentioned that somehow, for many teachers and schools. Do you have something to add to that?
Okay,
Because it becomes
yeah,
much deeper to the previous point.
uh, that would be a little harsh way of putting it. What I would say is that please remember that all schools and colleges in India were closed down from the 25th of March, if I'm not mistaken, when the nationwide lockdown was implemented as a precaution to stop the spread of COVID-19. Now, since then, these educational institutions have not been able to open till date. So to make sure that education of students did not come to a complete standstill, there was a paradigm shift from classroom teaching to online teaching. So schools and teachers have been forced to adapt to online teaching, leaving the traditional ways of teaching, as you said. And instead of saying that schools and teachers were reluctant in adoption of technology in a blanket manner, I would rather like to delve a little deep. So initially, it was thought that this COVID-19 scare threat, whatever you call it, would go away in a couple of months. So this closure of educational institutions in India were seen as a kind of preponed term break. It was thought that the loss of classes could be made up with extra classes when these reopened. But slowly, as it sunk in, that the threat was not to go away in a hurry, did alternative ways of teaching thought of and implemented. But to ensure a paradigm shift from classroom teaching to online teaching in a country like India with a 130 million plus population, 26.6% of whom are of school going age, that is under the age of 15 years. That too during the lockdown is no mean task. We also have to take into account that internet connectivity across India, across our country, is neither available nor affordable for all. And there was no training provided or a particular platform specified. So there was a lot of confusion and a little panic, as you said, amongst the teachers and schools. But even then, I would say that they are trying their level best in arranging synchronized, asynchronized, or a combination of both these kinds of online classes. I feel that we should rather laud their efforts and help them to improve, rather than, putting the blame on them. And that would be a rather oversimplification and making soft targets of them. So I believe that all the stakeholders, like the parents, the students, the schools, the teachers,
triangle.
and yes, not only the triangle, there are so many people involved, and even the educational policymakers, the government, they should all work in tandem. And
I'm talking about the immediate environment.
They will together. If they work together, this problem can be addressed. I hope you understand my point and able to get across it.
I understood your point, and so deeply that it saddens me that we talk about such high percentages, and that's why many conferences have been organized upon this COVID-19 issue, because we need to take action. And I feel very, very glad that all these people have contributed, educators from Greece, from all over the world, and talk about from many other aspects, the social aspect, the economic aspect, the linguistic aspect, the literature aspect. They want to contribute and help humanity realize what is happening. This is actually the main focus of today's interview as well, just to put our contribution into the contribution agenda.
Okay. Now, instead of an interview, it has become more of a conversation, and I'm very happy about that. So we are almost towards the end, but before we could end, would you like to say a few words that you wanted to say but have perhaps remained outside the scope of my queries, or maybe some words of advice that you'd like to share with the students community in general, so that they may not lose hope and come out of this pandemic stronger?
Well, I would say that what everybody has to keep in mind is that education is the bedrock of every society. It's the fundamental principles. My advisory message to the student population in times of crisis, and teachers as well, is best expressed by the words of David Crawford, a motivational speaker and author, who said that being challenged in life is inevitable, being defeated is optional. So schools must remain an enlightened and safe haven for learners of all nationalities, levels, statuses, and ages to achieve universal education.
Okay, that was very deep. So finally, we have come to the end of our conversation, and I'm sure our listeners have been greatly benefited by your wisdom this evening. Thanks again for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the chance to say all these things live. And thank you very much for informing me about the situation in India. I hope after this COVID-19 situation to be in a position to travel and visit you and have the chance to talk more about these things and contribute to the best of our ability. It was my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. But before we end, since you had mentioned Robert Frost and his comment that poetry provides, quote, a momentary stay against the confusion of the world, unquote, I cannot resist the temptation. Yes, of course. I cannot resist the temptation of quoting a few lines from his wonderful poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, that exemplifies this quote. So the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So we call it a day here and sign off with the hope that we will be able to overcome this crisis in education and the pandemic very soon. Till then, be careful and stay safe. Goodbye and good night to all.